The gospel lesson for this morning comes from the gospel according to Luke, chapter 15, beginning at verse 1 with selections. I do invite you to follow along. This is a story you've heard so many times, it can become monotonous almost to you. I want it not to be. So if you will turn to Luke chapter 15, beginning at verse 1, and then picking up again at verse 11. Let's listen for God's word. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quick, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us celebrate and eat. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The word of the Lord. Okay, let me take an informal poll. How many times do you think you have either heard that read or have read it yourself? 10? Put up your hands if it's at least 10. 20? 30? 100 times? I guess that's a sign of a congregation that is aging a little bit. We have a few hundred timers out there. So, what can I say that you haven't heard? I'm really wondering that. I mean, we know the behaviors, right, of those sons pretty well, if not from observing the variety of families in general from the outside, then I hope from observing the varieties of relationships within our family from that side. I think all of us know something about the relationship of parents to children, children to parents, whether they are mature or whether they are very young. Every person here has that experience. Well, look at these two guys. Neither of these sons have very much concern for their father. The father is asked by his younger son, and it's real important you get this right, to give him the portion of the property that would fall to him. Okay, the Greek word there means give me a portion of your substance, of your property. And as the youngest son, he would have gotten about 1/3 of the father's property. But here's the interesting part about this. Jesus continues that the father divided the living. And that word is bios. You know what that means, right? Bios. The living, breathing part of himself. Divided the bios between them. So in effect, this younger son has treated his father as if he's already dead. He wants his part of the inheritance, 1/3. The other 2/3 go to the older brother. He divided it between them. Now keep that in mind, will you? Between them. It's the father, as many of us have probably felt. It's the father who needed to run away from home, not the younger son. And there's that older brother who never left home. He was in charge of 2/3 of the livelihood of his dad. Now here's the deal. He's ambitious. He's rigidly organized. He's status conscious. He's sensitive. He is impatient. He takes on more than he can handle, perhaps. He wants other people to get in line with his point of view, and he's concerned with time management. He is a focused individual. And some of us, just like those to whom Jesus was speaking, who was he speaking to? Just say it. He was speaking primarily to the Pharisees, who were concerned that he was eating with tax collectors and sinners, publicans. And so those to whom Jesus is speaking, a lot of those people have done everything that the older brother did. They haven't colored outside the lines. They haven't done anything to shame their families. And they've been law-abiding, resourceful, and thoughtful. Upstanding citizens, you know, and responsible adults who have very little patience, by the way, with the likes of the younger brother who doesn't play by the rules. I'm just saying, does this sound like anybody you know? I mean, we're institutional people. It ought to sound a lot like people we know, perhaps even ourselves. And he, like us, was predisposed, I'd say, to what Dorothy Sayers called the cold-blooded sins: envy, pride, avarice. So here is this older son. He's in charge of everything his father has. He was also in charge of the work of the household, so he had to run the servants and slaves and make sure they functioned properly. He had to do the books. He had to do everything. I work like a slave for you, and I never disobeyed you. I think it's an interesting choice of words. I worked like a slave for you. He never once says, a son. Worked like a slave for you. And yet you have not even given me a young goat so that I may celebrate with my friends. Well, hello, the father is in effect dead. You have the responsibility for everything. You can take the fatted calf by yourself and have the friends over and go for it. But no, that's not what he says. And then he goes on. But when this son of yours, very important, he doesn't say my brother, he says this son of yours. And then there's that irresponsible younger son, very sensitive soul, possessed of powerful impatience and impulsivity to the max, spending to his heart's content. Everything's good. Live for today. Carpe diem. Let's roll with it. And off he goes to a country far away, a Gentile country. And when the famine hits, he has nothing to fall back on. He's got to go to work, and he goes to work for someone tending pigs. Now, I need to tell you, and you probably already know this, that anyone who's tending pigs and is a Jew, you can't sink any lower than that. You've gone straight to the bottom. And the chances are good you've got no business ever going home again, because that is the worst thing that could possibly happen. And then suddenly he came to himself. That means it suddenly occurred to him where he was and what it was he was doing. And so he begins to rehearse this speech of confession. Have you ever done that before? The speech of confession, where you kind of lay it out there and say it from the heart. He comes prepared. Treat me as one of your day laborers. One of the people you would pick up there in Plano or down there on Park Lane. Treat me like that. He's the poster child for Dorothy Sayers' hot-blooded sins, anger and impulsiveness, and perhaps lust. Emily Heath writes a brilliant story, and she shared a story about a young man, very gifted, absolutely brilliant, who ended up going off on his own and believed he had reached the end of the road. He was a complete and utter failure, and he took his own life. The grief of the family was palpable, and it was of the congregation of which he had been a part. And the pastor who preached the memorial service said, he felt like he had disappointed everyone who had ever loved him. And he had. And so have we all. The pastor was right. The fact is, we are often disappointed with those whom we love. And we are all aware of those whom we have disappointed in turn. And so it is with the younger son that all of us have an awareness of who he is, because it's somewhere inside of us. We don't want to let it out, but it's inside of us. And so he's no less astonished than his brother is that there's this party. His father doesn't even let him get the words out that he'd rehearsed. It's party time. But what about the father? The father who is as good as dead because he's given up his inheritance. He's a lot like King Lear, who maybe foolishly gives away his life to his daughters. His confession is pretty well blown away by his father, kind of ignoring it and just saying, "Oh, to heck with that, bring the robe, put a ring on his finger, shoes on his feet, Bring out the Omaha steaks and throw them on the grill. Get out the 25-year-old scotch and let's have a party. And the oldest son, who works his inheritance, wasn't even consulted about this party. This is the guy who owns the place, not even consulted. And I wonder if he's just as resentful to his father as he is to his brother. The father goes out to the son to plead with him to come in. A couple of years ago, NPR did a piece that was absolutely fascinating. A 31-year-old social worker in New York City by the name of Julio Diaz was in a very typical pattern for himself. He followed the routine every single evening. He'd take his hour-long trip on the subway and stop one stop short of where he's supposed to get off, and there he would go to dine at a place he really enjoyed. Well, on one particular day, he stepped off the number 6 train, and his life changed. He was walking toward the stairs when a teenage kid came up to him and asked for his money, and then pulled a knife on him. So Diaz reached into his pocket and gave the boy his wallet. The boy started to walk away toward the stairs, and Diaz said, "Hey, wait a minute. You forgot something. If you're going to be robbing people all night, why don't you take my coat, because otherwise you're going to freeze." And the young man stopped in his tracks, and he looked back at Diaz with a look of absolute astonishment, like, "Are you an idiot or what? Why are you doing this?" the young man said. "Well, if you're willing to risk your freedom for a few dollars, I guess you must really need the money," said Diaz. "I mean, all I wanted to do was go get dinner. And if you want to join me, hey, you're more than welcome." And astonishingly, the boy agreed. And so the two of them walked up the stairs together and on into this diner. And shortly after their arrival, as they're sitting in the booth, up comes the manager to greet Diaz and the boy, and then the dishwasher, and then the waiters, and then the receptionist. Everyone knew him. And the boy was absolutely stunned. He said, "Do you own this place or something?" "No," said Diaz, "I just eat here an awful lot." And the boy responded, But you're so nice to everyone, including the dishwasher." "Well, haven't you been taught to be nice to everyone?" "Yeah, but I don't really think that people actually behave that way." And so this social worker, who'd been working with people all day long, saw an opening, and he asked the boy what he wanted out of life. And the boy just made a sad face and said nothing. And when the bill arrived, Diaz looked at the teen and said, "Look, I guess you're going to have to pay for this because you have my wallet. But if you give me my wallet back, I'll gladly treat you." And somehow the teen didn't even think about it. He passed the wallet right back to Diaz. And Diaz said, "I paid the bill, and then I gave him $20. I figured it might help him." But Diaz asked for something in return, and he got it: the boy's knife. Sometimes grace comes upon us unawares. Whether we're like that teenager, whether we're like Diaz, whether we're like the elder and younger brother, grace comes upon us in ways we don't always expect. And I've always believed, kind of as a Calvinist, that you have to repent before forgiveness arrives. That's just not true. It's not true in this story, and it's not true in what most of Jesus' remarks say. You remember when the son comes with the rehearsed confession, the father's already rolling out the red carpet. He's already hugged him. He's already asked everything to happen. It's marvelous. Well, there's no ending to this story, is there? I mean, we kind of wonder, will that elder brother go into the party? Will he learn to say, my brother, instead of this son of yours? Will the younger brother end up working out in the fields for his brother? Or will he go back to his dad and say, hey, let's do this inheritance thing all over again? It's hard to say. The one thing I think we can be assured of is that this father is going to keep on loving his children. I really don't know every life situation in this sanctuary, and I don't know every hurt that has been sustained, whether it's hidden or even out front. I don't know how many of you are people who bring with you cold-blooded sins or hot-blooded sins. What I do know is that wherever we find ourselves, God's already there. God's way ahead of us. God's waiting for open arms for us. He's like the father in the parable who doesn't have to wait for our confession, but is happy that we've got a relationship restored. My prayer is that God's grace will surround us in such a way that we will feel that we're at home. That we're at home in our relationship with God, that we're at home with our relationship with others, and that there's someone rejoicing in our presence, whether we've strayed or whether we've stayed at home in the first place. Amen.